Dawn, I think we'll give it just a couple minutes if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready? No? Everyone?
I think so.
Okay, Dawn, I think we're ready to go.
All right. Thank you, Connie. Thank you all for joining us today for an important update on our path this year. Before we get started, I do want to take a quick roll call. I want to have an idea of which Water Authority members were able to make the webinar today. So I'm going to go through the list, and if you could just let me know if you're here. Mike Armstrong.
Here.
John Bailey. Lynn Goosen. Randy Hazlett.
Here.
Jeremiah Hobbs.
Here.
Gary Jansen. Pete Lockey. Senator McGinn. Alan Roth. Alan Sotart.
Here.
Gene Steiner.
Here.
David Stroberg. Okay. Ex officios, Andrew French, or I think Ryan might be here from the KCC.
Yes, I am here.
Thanks, Ryan. Earl Lewis.
Here.
Jake Albus. Susan Metzger.
Here.
Chris Kennedy, the new Secretary for Wildlife and Parks. Sarah Bear.
Here.
Leo Henning.
Here.
Mike Beam.
Present.
Steve Frost.
Here.
Kayla Savage.
Here.
And Director Connie Owen.
I'm here.
All right. Thank you all for that. I would like to remind you that at the end of the presentation today, we will have an opportunity for questions, and I will try to help make sure that all of the Water Authority members get an opportunity to ask your questions. So I want to go back just briefly and talk about that at our January meeting of the Kansas Water Authority, Governor Kelly asked the Water Authority to work with key stakeholders at the federal, state, and local levels, public and private, to develop a strategic plan similar to how our state developed comprehensive transportation plans. Specifically, the governor called for recommendations to lay a foundation for a large-scale, long-term investment framework around the 5 guiding principles of the Kansas State Water Plan. The governor has asked for these recommendations before the 2025 legislative session. Recognizing that that is a tall order and would require full time to deliver this framework by the end of the year, we discussed at our January KWA meeting that we would recommend that the Kansas Water Office, the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and the Kansas Department of Health and Environment put together a team to help develop the recommendations. Today is an opportunity for you all to be introduced to the team and learn more about their initial approach. To be clear, what you are going to see is in draft form, and that is intentional. This process will be informed by the input of the KWA and our Regional Advisory Committee members. We will also have an opportunity for input and guidance along the way. As you will see in the presentation, stakeholder and public outreach is a major component of this effort. What the team learns from these discussions will help shape not only the framework recommendations, but also the process for how they're developed going forward. It's going to be a dynamic process from now until the end of the year, and at each stage, the Water Authority will have an opportunity for input and guidance. Rest assured, though, we met with Governor Kelly last week to preview the information we will cover with all of you today, and she is highly interested in how you feel about this process, and she wants to make sure that input will be a cornerstone of these eventual recommendations, and it will be. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Director of the Kansas Water Office, Connie Owen, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you for everybody who is able to attend this webinar today, particularly members of the Water Authority, voting members, and ex officios for sharing some of your time with us today. And Dawn's pretty much covered the whole intro and lead up, so that was good job, Dawn. And I just want to echo that this is a unique opportunity that dovetails with the Kansas Water Authority's pre-existing movement toward wanting a strategic plan for implementation of the Kansas Water Plan. So I think pieces are falling into place with a lot of good support from the governor's office, as well as interest from the legislature and stakeholders and the public all across the state. So it's a good time to come together and really make some of the things that we've all known that need to happen. And so I will turn that over to the lead that we have for our team. But first, let me introduce Julie Lorenz. And she leads a team from Burns and Mack and from a subsidiary of Burns and Mack. And she is the former secretary of the Kansas Department of Transportation. And in that capacity, she helped lead and push over the finish line, as it were, the Ike transportation plan. So she has deep and extensive experience with this kind of strategic planning. So we're very happy to have her and her team. And at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Julie.
All right, thank you, Connie. Thank you, Dawn, both for introducing the effort and the introductions for this presentation. So we'll get started. I'm glad to be with you all today. Water is for everyone. I think this is a fantastic opening slide and really is the key message here. Water is an urban issue. Water is a rural issue. Water is an economic issue. Water is a health issue. I could go on and on and on. Water is key to our success as a state. So water is for everyone, and that will be a theme that you will be hearing, and something that we will be keeping forefront in our mind as we work through the development of a strategic implementation plan. This plan is for every Kansan. Today's objective is to share with you the approach, to introduce the approach as to how we will operationalize and implement the water plan. So this is how we will approach our work, and I'll speak to both of those issues, operationalizing and implementing, in just a second. Really, and echoing much of what's already been said, there's a lot of positive momentum in our state as it relates to water. There's some historic investments that the governor and the legislature have pushed forward. There's great bipartisan support, strong leadership from the governor's office. And essentially, there's grassroots interest, as I've said, all across the state. And there are great local conservation success stories. So there's a lot to build upon. And I would be remiss if I don't call out that Kansas is a national leader in aquifer data collection and analysis. So we are really poised to move forward and make sure that we've got a strong water future in our state. And with no surprise, right, with lots of good opportunity, there's increased responsibility. There's great momentum underway that's due to the hard work across the state. But the job's not done. There are challenges that loom large for how we maintain steady progress, right? Not just cyclical, have a couple of good years, a couple of bad years, but how do we maintain steady progress? And I could have chosen any number of articles or headlines to make the point that we're not done yet. So the governor, as Connie mentioned, as Don mentioned, provided a charge to the Water Authority in January to apply sort of the same principles of being inclusive and nimble, a long-term approach to water issues that have been applied to the state's transportation plan, and to craft a long-term framework around the 5 guiding principles and looking for recommendations in each of these areas: policies, capacity and water management, braiding federal, state, and local funding together, having measurable goals and timelines, and input from state and local stakeholders. And it might be worth a moment or two here to explain a little bit about the transportation program in Kansas. It's really been a 40-year history, evolving history. I'll speak to that just a bit more. But the current plan that we're operating under, IKE, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, is a 10-year view at $10 billion with investments that will be seen in every part of the state, in all kinds of modes, pipelines of projects that are identified for development as well as for construction. And those pipelines are filled both from a very data-driven approach for the preservation work, and then seeking local input on modernization and expansion projects. And every 2 years, those pipelines are replenished. And when I say replenished, it's really, you've got projects that are being developed, you pull some out from development, they go into construction, and then you backfill. Backfill would be a better word than replenish, because we can't afford to meet all the needs in the state in terms of transportation, so we have to prioritize. And then based on dollars that are available, we pull those projects out of the construction pipeline and move them to construction. So it's a much more nimble approach than had been used previously in our state. So there are many elements that make sense for water, but it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison. We'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. So the team that will be working on this strategic implementation plan is made up, is comprised of some of the key members that developed the IKE program that I just talked a bit about, as well as deep water expertise from Burns and McDonnell. And I'd like to point out really something I think is really important around the success of IKE is that it passed with 94% support by the legislature. On a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock in March, right before the legislature was adjourned due to COVID. And so it's that kind of grassroots support, legislative support, governor's leadership that all came together to get this major program passed just in the nick of time. But it wasn't any one agency and it wasn't any one group. It was really a long combined effort that put the best interests of the state forward and is now being executed quite well by KDOT. So let's talk a bit about the similarities between transportation and water. They're both essential for the long-term viability of our state. I've long talked about transportation as like the connecting fiber. Like, think of it as like your ligaments and tendons. It's like what holds us all together. But man, water, like that's like the lifeblood of our state. And so there's a good connection, like, right, you can kind of make that analogy. There are multiple layers of government and authority and funding resources that come into play both for transportation and for water. And it's critically important to think about regional differences, urban and rural needs, different kinds of terrain or geography, watershed. So we have to take those regional differences into account. And we also need to make sure that we have strong stakeholder understanding and support for the long haul, both to make sure that projects are implemented, programs are targeted properly for what they're trying to achieve. And quite frankly, so that we're able to keep funding together so that we can implement the good work that needs to be done. But boy, there are some big differences too. And I want to acknowledge those right up front and be very clear that our team is sensitive to the differences. So in some ways, transportation, honestly, like easier than water in that the state owns the asset. The state literally owns state highways and has eminent domain. And so those are the kinds of things that make it easier, I think, for transportation. And KDOT has the tools and the data and the processes from 4 successive 10-year programs. So there's a long history and there's understanding within the stakeholders and within communities about sort of how transportation works. It has certainly evolved over the years, but there's a good understanding of how that all kind of comes together. In many regards, the water is similar, but maybe at an earlier stage in development, so to speak. Certainly within water, there's more local control and focus at the more localized level. And there's one state agency, KDOT, responsible for the most part for state transportation issues, other than, you know, fees and registration things that are collected. The dollars are collected in a different group, but there are multiple state agencies that administer water programs. And so those are the key, to me, those are the key similarities and differences, and both need to be taken into account. So I talked a little bit earlier about operationalizing. And so that is a word I think of that just really means, how do you actually make the things that you say work? How do you put them into practice? And so I will just take a minute and kind of walk you through the guiding principles of IKE, the transportation program. And these are good words and these are good principles and what you want to do. You want to be flexible and responsive, and you want to solve problems, and you want to leverage partnerships, and you want to be transparent and accountable. Yeah, you want to be those things, but how do you do those things, right? And so that's where, I want to show you, demonstrate how these principles translate into work. So first, we said, hey, we need to be more flexible and responsive. That required a policy change. Previously, transportation projects were selected every 10 years. We said at KDOT coming into the IKE program, we're not that good. Like, things change too quickly in modern times to pick projects for 10 years. We need to be more flexible and adaptive. We need to be more flexible and responsive. So that's how we came to the decision to select projects every 2 years. But we did that in consultation with lots of communities, in consultation with the governor's office and with legislators. The next one, we want to be flexible and responsive. We also need to make sure that that works in funding and programming. So by that, I mean, we said, all right, the number one priority across the state, we heard from stakeholders, is preserve the good highways that we have, improve the ones that aren't good, and keep the good ones in good shape. The state highway system that asset is worth north of $30 billion. So we need to make sure we're maintaining it well. So once you take care of that, then we want to take care of growing the system, so to speak. But we heard people loudly and clearly, we were going to be responsive. We're going to make preservation our top priority. So it has been allocated 5 out of the $10 billion. That is the same sort of listening process we'll use as we think about the relative priorities between aquifer and reservoirs and quality and quantity and all those things. We'll never have enough money to achieve all of our goals. So we need to listen to people to think about relative allocations. Under the selection criteria, solving problems, we said, all right, if we're going to build new projects, we want to make sure that we're building the projects that are the most meaningful, the most helpful in the regions in which they'll be built. So we take regional input and priorities into account. That input is weighted at 25% of a project's total score if it's for an expansion project. Economic analysis is also conducted when you select transportation projects for expansion. And we updated the criteria under T-Works. It had been around creating jobs, which was very important in 2008, 2010. You can remember during the Great Recession. Now, people's time is super valuable, so we updated some of that economic criteria. So those are ways that you take principles and you put them into action. We said under leveraging partnerships, working with our partners, that if you were to move forward with a project, a modernization or expansion project, local contribution would be needed. That doesn't always mean money because we have to take, again, those regional differences into account. It might mean that a community brings forward some property to help with right of way, or might say, hey, we'll develop the feeder roads if you take care of the primary intersection cave out or interchange. So that's how the leveraging partnership actually plays out in measurable ways. And then this measurable targets, being transparent and accountable, being very clear about what dollars are being invested in which programs and what are the outcomes. So those are how we took the principles and actually put them to work for Kansas. So now we're going to transition and talk a little bit about the process, our timeline in 2 phases. First phase is from now until the end of June. And the next phase, phase 2, would go from July to December. And you can see here, we're taking a look at what the governor has charged the water office and the water authority to do. And all of the other partners is to look at policy changes, ways to improve capacity and water management, the funding issue, measurable goals, timelines, and stakeholder input. And you can see the kinds of questions we're going to ask in phase 1, the kinds of input we'll be seeking, as well as when we will be touching base, both with the water authority. We'll be with you at your April 17th meeting and in June to provide ongoing updates, to hear your questions, seek your guidance and input, as well as local consult through the RAC sort of process will be convened in late June. So we'll be going around the state to seek input. You can see on policy changes around strengths and weaknesses of existing programs and projects, to seek input on which programs are effective, what are gaps, what other projects or programs might be needed, how might we prioritize investments. Look at all sources of funding. We've already started that analysis and we will continue that through phase 1. Draft goals from stakeholder feedback with refinements that will continue through phase 1, and have ongoing interviews and discussions with stakeholders and get out into all across the region in June. We'll take all of that information and start to, think about what recommendations might look like, how you might track goals and objectives and measures and investments. And we'll come back out then in that second phase with some policy draft. Man, I just can't emphasize enough. Draft, thought starters, want to hear from you. Prioritization, investment areas with targets. Start to identify tools and processes that are needed. Identify long-term stable funding sources. Start to think about program funding that correlates with goals and targets. Finalize goals and establish timelines. We will then come back out in the second phase, likely the fall. I think that would be plenty of work to do during the summer. Come back out likely the fall and go through a second round of statewide meetings to hear your thoughts about this entire process. I go back to what we said, water's for everyone. So we need to hear from everyone to take your views, your priorities into account. So a little more specifics now, the upcoming milestones in April and May. So we're providing an overview today. We will be at the Water Authority meeting on April 17th to discuss our approach in greater detail. After that meeting, we will have ongoing discussions with key stakeholders. And I want to underscore here, these are examples of the kinds of groups we'll be engaging with. This isn't an exhaustive list. I tell you, every time I talk with someone, they have another 5 or 6 ideas of people to talk with. And that's exactly what we want at this point, is to be making sure we're spreading a broad net and hearing from everyone. It goes back to that water is for everyone. The conversations that we'll be having early on are related more to policy changes and ways to improve capacity and water management. I would also like to point out, so you can see the blue box then relates to the governor's charge. I'd like to point out and promote that on April 24th, the Kansas Infrastructure Hub is having a summit in Salina. That is, you may be aware, about $380 million worth of grant requests were received. The water office, hats off, working very hard, very quickly to get those grant funds moving. I think there's about $17 million that was allocated. The reason I bring this up is because there are other funds that are available through Bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or IIJA, that might be suitable, that might be helpful to backfill some of those other grant requests. I encourage you to be looking at all kinds of ways to get the projects that you need funded. And so that's why I wanted to bring up the hub, upcoming hub meeting. So as I mentioned, we'll be coming out for local consult in June. It's a regional approach. I'll be very clear. We are not going to meet with individual RACs one at a time. We don't have time or money, honestly, to do that level of outreach. I wish we could. So we'll be looking at multiple RACs meeting at one time. Got a great group working on outreach right now to figure out sort of like what combinations of RACs would make the most sense. By May 20th, I'm not going to say by, I'm going to say the week of May 20th, we'll get save the dates out so that you know which meeting will be occurring like closest to you. You're welcome to come to more than one meeting. This is not going to be one of those, here's a presentation, ask a couple questions and we're done kind of meeting. It's not that. This is going to be some scenario planning, some what if, trade-off kinds of conversations. Honestly, sometimes they can be a little uncomfortable because we don't have enough money to do everything for everyone in the time frame in which you want. So we're going to have some difficult conversations about setting priorities, but it's through those kinds of conversations that we can make the most progress and that everyone can understand the direction we're going and can ask really good questions. You may not agree with everything that happens, but you'll understand it and you'll be able to play a role in that decision-making process. So we really hope that you'll participate and bring your questions and your thoughts and your concerns, and we will have processes developed for you to participate in so that you can understand how your views are being taken into account. So this was wonderful, not last Thursday, but Thursday before. Had the opportunity to hold a focus group with 46 K-State senior ag econ students. It was really a fantastic experience, and we saw some key generational differences. So K-State had conducted a survey of 6 states previously. So we took those same questions and we brought those forward to this ag econ class. And I want to share some of the results, some of their thinking, and I think it's illuminating, and it's, I think, helps me be very hopeful for our state. I want to point out that we'll continue to have these kinds of conversations, broad stakeholder discussions going forward. But relative to this one class on a Thursday morning, we had 46 participants, and we started by asking them to take a name tag that best represents what their long-term plans are after graduation, and you can see the distribution here. 6 ultimately want to return to irrigation farming in Kansas, 15 to dryland farming, 14 to continue work in Kansas, 10 to work somewhere other than Kansas, and 1 is undecided or just hasn't quite figured it out yet. Fair enough. So they were a thoughtful, engaged, articulate group. We compared their responses to the responses from the 6 states. And I would also want to point out sort of the demographic difference in that 75% of the respondents for the previous survey were 55 or older. And of that, 50% of all the respondents were 65 or older. So clearly this group we talked to is younger. When we compared their thoughts, they are more willing to think about the future and we're more willing to think about community impacts than older respondents. Not sure that that's a big surprise, but it's something for us to take into account as we do our outreach, as we think about policies, as we think about timelines. They, and not surprising, because remember, this is an ag econ class and these smarties had been listening. They underscored the value of incentives so that they could be competitive, economically competitive on their farming operations. They also raised a host of other issues that they're concerned about, and it ranging from rural depopulation to international trade. I thought this was interesting too, in that we hear a lot about the negative impacts of social media, they raised a point. I know, I still remember, like, I can remember the kid that was in the top back row who was from Western Kansas, who said, I have friends from Johnson County, and through social media, I'm able to stay connected to them and I understand what's going on in their world. And one of their primary recommendations to us when we asked how to make messages resonate or be more meaningful or understandable, they said, please make sure you're using trusted voices in the ag community. That would be incredibly helpful. And one quote that I thought was particularly meaningful said, you know, our kids aren't even born yet. We have to start looking out for them now. So that really resonated. All right, so this is my final slide, and then I'll turn it back to Don. If you have questions for now, please contact Jake White, and you can see his email address, and he's at Burns and McDonald. I say for now, we are working actively. The plan is to have a website or a web page so that you'll be able to go out and you can see materials that are being provided, like we would post this presentation on the website, post local consult materials. We will have a place for you to pose questions, kind of like a comment form. Eventually, we will have a survey that's out there as well. It is our intention to get as much information to stay as in touch with you as possible. We're getting our sea legs under us in all sorts of respects. And this is one which is for right now. Jake is our primary contact. If you have questions, he'll get you in touch with the right person. But we absolutely have, we're moving in the direction of being more engaging and providing information in an easier to find format. So with that, I'm happy to have any questions that Don wants to send my way, but let's start with her.
Julie, thank you so much. There's so much really great information here, and you gave such a great presentation. So thank you. I'd like to see if the Water Authority members have questions, and I want to make sure that all of you get an opportunity. So I'm going to call on you. So the first one I see on my screen, of course, is Randy. Randy, you knew you'd be first. Do you have any questions for Julie or her team?
Hey, you seem to always pick on me first, Don. So
I know.
I don't think I have any questions just yet. It looks like a good plan, a good layout. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more developed as it goes on. I noticed the 46 participants. Were most of those pretty diverse? Were they come from across the state, or do you know, were they more localized into Central?
It's a good question. They were pretty dispersed across the state. And I would say that not because we pulled on that, but we would ask if someone offered a comment. Sometimes we would say, so, you know, like, where are you from? And it was, I would say we had good representation.
Okay, yeah, then it makes sense, but as it looks like, you know, the ones that might be interested in irrigated farms, I'd be curious whether to know whether they actually had background experience on those farms or if that was something new to them.
No, that my impression, and I think Amy's on the phone as well. She and I did this work as a team. Yes, I think based on their comments and their questions, I think that their families have expertise in that area. Yes.
Okay, very good.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, they were
Anything
an
else?
impressive. If I could just add in, Doug, they were an impressive group. I mean, they were as worried about what farmers in Iowa are doing in a competitive nature as to what's going on in international trade. They were a sharp group. They were very impressive.
Yeah, the Oglala Summit there in Liberal was a pretty good representation of that too.
Thank you, Randy. Anything else?
No, I think that's all I have for right now. Look
Okay.
forward to the April meeting.
Great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Jeremiah, you're next on my list.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't really have any real questions or anything. I was just going to say I do like the idea of having scenarios that we can work through as part of the process to get more information on this. So really thought that was an interesting or a good approach to this as well. But as far as actual questions, Don, I do not have any at this time.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Mike Armstrong.
I think it's a good start. I thought it was a good presentation. I think this is really a good framework to start the work. I thought it was good that you mentioned that Julie mentioned that there were several different differences between the highway funding and water project funding. One of the big ones, I think, was mentioned that the state doesn't own all the assets. So one question I do have is, how is the Corps of Engineers going to be engaged? I didn't see anything mentioned about that. And then I do have another question.
Yeah, the Corps is absolutely, we consider them both a partner and a key stakeholder. So they will be engaged. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing that I think is different from the highway situation is that it seems like the total funding is kind of already known or identified with the highway projects. And I think that's one of the biggest gaps that we have with the water situation is we don't have a really good long-term plan that has quantified how much money we really need. Like, what do we want to try to accomplish? And I think, to me, that's just been the biggest gap. And going through this process, in addition to having the ongoing funding prioritization, I feel like it's very critical that we come up with a clear long-term master plan, strategic plan, whatever it is that, if our goal is that we want to create sustainable reservoirs that are going to be useful for generations into the future, that we need to state that and then quantify what it's going to take to get there. And so I think that's another big difference between the highway approach and the thing that we're talking about today.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. I agree.
Thank you, Mike. Great points. Let's see, Alan Sotart.
Here, so thank you. I think Julie did as well. I'll echo the same. She did a great job making the presentation, and I think I'm really excited because I do feel like this is really monumental, not only for the authority, but also for the state of Kansas. And I appreciate the governor kind of taking her position and putting that, kind of at our feet. Thank you. But the other thing I did catch in there, we as an authority, we rely on the RAC committees a lot for feedback. So, and I do understand that, again, being a monumental project, that you don't have a lot of time built in to do individual interviews or something like that. But at some point, I just, I as much as we rely on them for feedback, we just certainly don't want to overlook. So that's just an observation more than anything. But otherwise, no, I don't have any questions.
Thank you,
Julie
Alan.
took a note of that. Thank you.
Jean Steiner.
Thank you. First of all, the presentation has been very helpful. I think we're all quite eager to get started, knowing how much work's ahead of us. I wanted to ask a little bit more about how you envision the stakeholder engagement, and you listed, 5 or 6 key groups, of which there's probably going to be several more added. But do you see this input? How much of the input will be kind of sector by sector versus how much of it would be mixed? And are these primarily going to be public meetings that would be well advertised and people could come? They're not. I mean, it's part of the open meetings process, right?
So it's a variety of methods. So everything from like we did the one focus group with the K-State students. That's an example. I could imagine some virtual kind of focus groups with key stakeholders. I would imagine, as we've talked already, doing these meetings all across the state. Those are absolutely open with combined RAC regions. We haven't talked, and it's still like, we're working toward absolutely on the website. There are ways that you can engage with folks so that you could, like they can do a prioritization exercise online. We absolutely want to get people to, and you have different screens, so it explains, so it's not just like pick the three things you like, but there are scenarios or there's information so that people can arrange their priorities online. So those are a variety of ways to do outreach. So some will be by sector, some will be by geography. I think it's really important. And it's a balance because we have from now until the end of the year, we have to get through the first phase to gather initial thoughts, take that into account and pretty quickly move into recommendations, prioritization processes, that sort of thing. At every step of the way, work with the water authority so that you have insight and provide your opinions along the way. And be able to get back out in the fall so that we're essentially doing 2 rounds of engagement, because it's not going to be helpful to just hear people and then go off in isolation and create recommendations and think, okay, well, we had the first, like we heard them. We need to have that 2-step process. And so, I mean, you know, if we had the time, the risk here is time. It is not like the intent or the content. It's trying to keep at pace. And I want to give a big shout out to the water subcabinet and the water office for what Matt is just so fast, and everybody else has been providing information very quickly. And that's what we have to have in order to keep pace with the schedule.
Thank you.
All right, so we had questions from our voting members that were here. How about, do we have any questions from our ex officios? I know many of you have already been working with Julie, but are there any additional questions from our ex officio members of the Water Authority?
Yeah, Dawn, I just have one. It's good to see you, Julie. So I think the best information that you get that's most pertinent is framed with the right questions that are asked and are consistently asked. I'm assuming there'll be a strategy at the meetings, of course, depending on public meeting versus focus meetings. But will that be part of the process to try to get a consensus?
So that is a great question, Mike. You're thinking ahead. So the answer is yes, in terms of asking similar questions so that we can kind of do a compare and contrast across whether it's geography or sector. So yes. Consensus, you know, what I would say that is a continuum, right? So we'll want to understand where various folks land on various issues. And that's what I would say, is we want to be able to understand where various folks land on various issues. And then if there are ways that we can work toward support in some cases, understanding in other cases. So, you know, I think as you think about the various aspects, whether it's quality, quantity, aquifer programs, I wouldn't say that consensus across all of those is exactly what we're going for yet. I don't think we know enough yet to set that goal.
Yeah, as soon as I use that term, I realize that's probably not the right term right now. Thank you.
But we absolutely are going to be taking a consistent approach so that we can come back to you with compare and contrast. And I think that K-State example was a really good one. That I don't think those questions all are relevant. Not all those questions need to be asked, but a handful of those will be asked in every setting so that we can kind of get a feel for that. Yeah.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be good, Mike. I'm looking forward to it too.
Thanks, Mike. Anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I do. I'm
Morning, Sarah.
Sarah Bear, the director of the Kansas Biological Survey. And thanks for giving this presentation. So it seems like this strategic plan, like the approach that you are developing, is largely stemming from social perspectives. And I appreciate, like, you know, the range of perspectives that you are seeking to meet with and engage, but I'm kind of wondering whether or not you plan on meeting with scientists or investing in science to learn more about forecasting the state of water, the quantity, the quality now, but also into the future and under scenarios that will change yearly. The
Yeah,
strategic
that's a
plan
great
that we
question.
make now will most certainly need to be adaptively managed.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
as populations change, as industries move in, as climate changes, on and
Of
on.
course. Sure. Yes. So I would say our outreach absolutely will be informed by data and science and other sorts of things. We've already had a meeting with the Kansas Geologic Survey. We are just getting started, so we've got lots of folks to talk with. In fact, I'm in Washington, DC next week to work with congressional staffers on scenario planning. So I will not say that we would be looking on a yearly basis as what shifts occur on a yearly basis. I think when I think of scenario planning, I think of it in terms of trends, looking at different trends and how those combine and collide to create different kinds of future scenarios. And then you do some planning against those various scenarios, various futures. And you absolutely then take a look at what levers you have for investment or for populations to change their behaviors. So you look at all those sorts of things to figure out what those impacts might look like, what the cost of those impacts look like, what those impacts do in terms of your achieving targets and over what time frame. So all of that comes into play as you start to do those kind of like what if, those scenario conversation, the trade-off conversation. Absolutely.
But I guess, is there a plan to fund the research developing those scenarios?
No, we have to work with what we have right now. That is, we have from now until the end of this year. So, which is not to say that this first cut isn't the thing that doesn't create additional research and isn't informed, but we have this year to get ourselves organized and to start thinking in a prioritization format. I think that lots of research is ongoing. Is more research needed? I mean, probably we haven't fully explored that yet. I think it's called for in terms of recommendations in the state water plan. But I think just as a practical matter, hard for me to imagine we'll be doing a lot of research, a lot of original research between now and the end of the year in order to inform the engagement. I think we have to generally use the work that's been developed, but I would certainly defer to Don, Connie, Earl, others on the phone. Because there's a lot I don't know.
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. Do you have anything else that you'd like to ask? Okay. Anyone else from the ex officio group?
Yeah, Dawn, thank you. Kayla here with Department of Commerce. Julie, thank you for the presentation and the detailed notes on timeline. I think we're all feeling the pressure to get this done this year. One of the stakeholder groups that I didn't see necessarily called out on the slides, but just wanted to make sure that it's on your radar that we, of course, are coordinating with or wanting to make sure are involved is our economic development champions across the state. So just wanted to mention that here. And then the only other comment I had is more of a question. It's more of a question comment of Governor's Water Conference, big event, involves a lot of us. What kind of data or presentation would we anticipate potentially having at that point related to this planning process? So I think just
Kayla,
looking forward.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. As it relates to the Eco Diva, absolutely. Whether you're talking about recruiting businesses or making sure that communities can provide water plans as they do recruitment, or there's just no doubt that they're inextricably linked. Economic development, ongoing economic vitality and water, they're all linked together. So I appreciate that. And yes, again, representative list on the slide, but yes, absolutely. We want to engage them. Governor's Water Conference, I think we will want to figure out both what's been developed to date and share that back, but then also like, I never want to waste I never want to waste an opportunity of being in front of people and not seeking additional information that will help propel us to the next step, whatever that is in our sequence. So yeah. And you know, whether it's like poll anywhere, you know, like real-time polling in a meeting or some trade-off conversation, but yeah, there are so many opportunities to seek input. We want to hear from everyone and at the same time be using that input in a productive way to shape the result, the recommendation.
Great. Look forward to it. That's all for me, Dawn. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. Anyone else on the ex officios? Okay. I know there's a few other folks on the Zoom call. Is there anyone who would like to give a question to the team? All right, Julie, I hear no more questions. We might be able to give people 8 minutes of their day back.
Don, this is Randy.
Hi, Randy. Yes.
Just one more point. And on phase one of the project, and I know after April 17th, it looks like some meets with stakeholders and the list you had there of the 6 at the ag leaders. I'm not sure if that's producers, but phase one project, you're probably going to have a tough time getting producers to pull out of the field to participate in things. So be aware of that.
Yes. I am, and I will be one of the things that we'll talk about on the 17th is ways that we can engage that we might not be thinking about, but what we can do to make sure we are hearing from people. It's important. There's just not enough time to, like, you know, there's just not enough time. And you're gonna hear me say that over and over again. So we'll be looking for ways that we can engage with folks in a time efficient way for everyone, and particularly understanding that the constraints that they have, the work that they need to do.
Very good. That's all I had. And I think we're off to a good start here. I think everything's looking like we should have a good product when we get to the end.
I look forward to seeing you on the 17th.
All right, Julie. Connie, anything further?
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating and for sharing their lunch hour today. Thank Julie very much for making the presentation. And hopefully this sets up good conversation for the Water Authority meeting and all the conversations that will follow from today. So, yeah.
Well, thank you all. Appreciate everyone who took the time today to join us. And we look forward to seeing you all on April 17th in Garden City.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.